A drowned Spanish fleet still surfaces on a beach in Sligo when the tide runs low. 22 people abandoned an island off Kerry and left the cats behind to go feral. A gas with no smell and no color is quietly killing more people in Ireland every year than car crashes do. And under the most photographed cliffs in the country, 66 people have walked off the edge and never walked back. This is a countdown through the parts of Ireland that don't make it onto the postcards, the geology, the water, and the history that the tourist board doesn't put on a leaflet. Every fact in this video is real, documented, and on the public record, pulled from coroner's files, geological surveys, and government reports. Before we get into it, if you've never subscribed to a channel about the ground trying to kill you, now's a strange but fair time to start. And do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where in Ireland or the Irish diaspora you're watching this from. Locals always show up to argue about their own backyard, and honestly, that's half the fun of this list. So let's start at the bottom. Number 15. The Turlos of the Burren, County Clare. A turlo is a lake that isn't there half the year. The Burren sits on top of porous, cracked limestone, and instead of rain running off into rivers, it drains straight down through the rock. When the water table rises in autumn, it comes back up through the same cracks and fills a hollow in the land with a full lake, sometimes within hours of heavy rain. By summer, that same hollow is dry grass with cattle grazing on it. Some turlos, like the one at Carron, sit inside a valley, so enclosed geologists call it a polgy, over 3 kilometers long and 60 meters deep, with only a single narrow fissure controlling whether the whole basin fills or empties. A handful of turlos near the coast are even affected by the tide. Turlos are found almost nowhere else on Earth outside of one site in Wales. Walk across one in August and you're on solid ground. Come back in January and you're standing in 4 feet of water that came from nowhere you can see. Ireland doesn't need monsters under the bed. It just needs limestone. Number 14. Skellig Michael, 12 kilometers off the coast of County Clare. In the 6th century, a small community of monks decided the safest place to practice their faith was a spike of Devonian sandstone in the open Atlantic, reachable only by 618 hand-cut stone steps, with no rail and no rope. They built their beehive-shaped stone huts, without mortar, 180 meters above the sea, on a narrow terrace known as Christ's Saddle, and stayed for over 600 years, surviving Atlantic storms and at least one recorded Viking raid in the year 823, when the abbot himself was reportedly carried off. The isolation that was supposed to bring them closer to God is the same isolation that on a bad crossing day still strands modern visitors and cancels the boats entirely. They chose the hardest rock in Ireland to live on purpose. Turns out isolation was the whole point, and the ocean still gets a vote on whether you get to leave. Number 13. The Great Blasket Island off the Dingle Peninsula in County Clare. This was once home to over 150 Irish speakers at its peak. A community so cut off from the mainland that when a resident fell seriously ill in the 1940s, there was no reliable way to get help across the Sound in time. By 1953, the population had fallen to 22, and on the 17th of November that year, the government evacuated the last of them to newly built cottages on the mainland. They left their furniture. They left their doors unlocked. They left their cats, which went wild and are, by most accounts, still out there today. Many of the islanders who'd already emigrated ended up an ocean away. In a tight-knit community in Springfield, Massachusetts, no one has lived on the Great Blasket permanently since that November morning. An entire way of life gone in a single tide crossing, and the island didn't even notice. Number 12. Marble Arch Caves, County Fermanagh. an 11.5-kilometer limestone cave system running 94 meters underground, first explored back in 1895. The system sits inside the Quilcall Lakelands, a UNESCO global geopark that straddles the border between Fermanagh and County Cavan, the world's first geopark of its kind to cross an international border. In July of 2025, a sudden intense downpour sent surface water pouring straight into the cave system while a tour group was still inside. Staff described the stairwell out turning into a waterfall in real time. The power failed, backup generators kicked in, then failed again, and guides had to walk visitors out through rising water and darkness before the entrance itself became impassable. The cave's own statement called it a weather event that had never happened there before in the site's history. A cave that took millions of years to carve can flood in 15 minutes. The Rock remembers water far better than the tour brochure lets on. Number 11. The 40-foot Sandy Cove, County Dublin. It's one of the most popular sea swimming spots in the country. A granite platform where people have bathed year-round for generations, and it has what locals call a good safety record. Its previous fatality before recent years was back in 1994, when a diver became entangled in nets. But submerged rocks near the entry point, a strong outgoing tide, and a sudden swell have proven fatal more than once, including a drowning in September of 2019 in conditions eyewitnesses described afterward as unswimmable, where the victim was pulled off the rocks by waves before rescuers could reach him. The water looks the same on a calm day as it does on a killing one. That's the trick with the 40-foot. The danger isn't hidden, it's just patient. And it waits for the one day the regulars decide to stay out of the water. Number 10. The Bog Bodies of the Irish Midlands. In February and June of 2003, within 3 months of each other, 2 Iron Age men turned up in separate peat bogs in County Meath and County Offaly. The first, later named Clonacavin Man, was uncovered by a peat-cutting machine. The second, Old Croghan Man, was so well preserved by the acidic, oxygen-starved peat that his fingerprints were still intact after roughly 2,200 years underground. Radiocarbon dating places his death somewhere between 362 and 175 BC. Both men appear to have died violently, and researchers believe the deaths were ritual in nature, tied to Iron Age kingship rights rather than ordinary crime. Ireland's peat doesn't just grow slowly. It keeps records, and it hands them back exactly as it found them. Now, if this list has already surprised you once, that's usually the point where people forget to hit subscribe, so consider this your reminder. And stick around, because the entries locals argue about hardest are still coming. Number 9. Palathamus, also called Glengad, on the North Mayo coast. On the 19th of September 2003, exceptionally heavy rain triggered not one landslide but a chain of roughly 40 separate slides across the hillside above the village. According to the Geological Survey of Ireland, the first major slide recorded in that parish since 1937. Thousands of tons of waterlogged peat and mud swept down the slope and into the sea, carrying part of the local graveyard with it. Coffins were pulled out of the ground and washed away, never recovered. The cause traced back partly to decades of overgrazing that had stripped the heather binding the peat together, leaving the hillside cracked and unstable long before the storm ever arrived. A hillside that looked stable for generations came apart in one night, and it took the dead along with the living certainty that the ground stays put. Number 8. Derrybrien, County Galway, on the slopes of the Sliabh Liag Mountains. In October of 2003, during construction of what was then one of the largest wind farms in Europe, the excavated peat destabilized the surrounding blanket bog, and roughly 450,000 cubic meters of it gave way in a single slide. It traveled over a kilometer before stopping, then moved again 3 weeks later when rain returned, eventually reaching Lough 20 kilometers away and killing an estimated 50,000 fish, wiping out more than half the lake's population in one event. The companies involved were later convicted over the pollution, and in 2019 the European Court of Justice fined the Irish state €5 million for failing to properly assess the site beforehand. The wind farm itself was finally decommissioned in 2022, nearly 2 decades after the slide. They were building clean energy infrastructure on top of ground that had been quietly unstable the entire time. The bog didn't object to progress. It just reminded everyone who was actually in charge. Number 7. Carrauntoohil, County Clare, Ireland's highest mountain at 3,407 feet. There are no waymarked trails to the summit. The most direct route, the Devil's Ladder, is a narrow, loose rock gully that funnels hikers and falling stones through the same tight space. In 2022, an experienced 61-year-old walker named John Dunn failed to return from a climb and was found by search dogs and a Coast Guard drone team 2 days later. He's one of over 40 fatalities Kerry Mountain Rescue Team. An entirely volunteer operation has responded to since it was founded in 1966. The team logged 68 callouts in 2021 alone, its busiest year on record, as growing crowds of poorly equipped walkers pushed the volunteers past their limits. In that same year, Mountain Rescue Ireland nationwide logged 408 incidents and 21 deaths across the country's hills. Carrauntoohil doesn't look like a killer from the car park. It looks like a nice walk with a view. That's exactly the problem. Number 6. Sliabh Liag, County Donegal. At roughly 601 meters, these are the highest accessible sea cliffs in Europe, nearly 3 times the height of the cliffs of Moher, dropping in one continuous sheet straight into the Atlantic. A Napoleonic-era signal tower still stands near the summit, built to watch for French invasion ships 2 centuries ago. The summit ridge is crossed by a route called One Man's Pass, a name that is not exaggerating. It's narrow enough that experienced walkers are advised against it in high wind, and there's no barrier of any kind between the path and 600 meters of open air. Sliabh Liag gets a fraction of the visitors the cliffs of Moher does, mostly because almost nobody's heard of it. The tallest sea cliffs in an entire continent, and most of the country can't tell you which coast they're on. Number 5. The Cliffs of Moher, County Clare. A 25-year study published in the Journal of Travel Medicine documented 66 deaths on or at the base of the cliffs between 1993 and 2017, on a trail where in most places there is still no barrier between the path and a 700-foot drop. In 2018, a Trinity College Dublin student died after falling while trying to take a photograph near the edge. A Sport Ireland safety audit of the coastal trail flagged 49 separate issues, more than half of them safety-related. This is the single most visited natural landmark in the entire country, 1.5 million visitors a year, walking a cliff edge that has claimed more than 2 lives a year for a quarter-century running, which is part of why sections of the trail were scheduled for closure in 2025 as part of a county-wide safety overhaul. The most photographed view in Ireland is also one of its deadliest, and almost nobody checks the numbers before they walk up for the picture. Number 4. Ireland's coastline and waterways, taken as a whole. Water Safety Ireland's national figures logged 78 drowning deaths in 2024 and 80 in 2025, with roughly 7 in 10 victims male, and Donegal posting the highest drowning rate per capita of any county in the country, at 6.5 per 100,000 residents. Nearly 2/3 of accidental drownings began not as a swim, but as an ordinary land-based activity, a walk. a hike, a bit of fishing from the rocks that ended in the water anyway. This isn't one dangerous spot. It's a pattern stitched across every coastal county in the country, and it rarely starts with someone planning to get wet at all. Number 3. Lough, Northern Ireland, the largest lake in Britain and Ireland, supplying over 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water and home to Europe's largest commercial wild eel fishery. In the summer of 2023, the lake underwent a severe algal bloom event, so visible that it could be seen from satellite imagery in space. Microcystin toxin levels exceeded World Health Organization recreational safety limits at every single sample site tested. Several dogs died after swimming in the water, and the bloom has returned to similar levels nearly every summer since. It isn't only the algae, either. Local authorities have also issued repeated warnings about hemlock water dropwort growing wild along the same shoreline. A native plant so toxic that officials describe it as perhaps the most poisonous in Britain and Ireland, highly dangerous to both humans and pets if ingested. Complicating the crisis further, the lakebed itself remains privately owned by a British aristocratic estate, a legal arrangement that campaigners say has slowed the push for stronger environmental protection. This is the country's single largest source of fresh water, and for 4 years running it has turned green enough to see from orbit. When the biggest lake in these islands can't be trusted to stay clean, that's not a local story anymore. Number 2. Streedog Strand, County Sligo, September of 1588. 3 ships of the Spanish Armada La Lavia, La Juliana, and the Santa Maria Divine sheltered in Donegal Bay for 4 days trying to outlast an Atlantic storm before their anchor ropes gave way and the sea drove them onto the sand. Historical accounts put the death toll at over 1,000 men drowned within sight of the shore in under an hour, with roughly 140 survivors later killed by English forces garrisoned nearby. One of the few who escaped, a Spanish captain named Francisco de Colar, later wrote an account of stumbling ashore and making his way across Ireland to safety, which remains one of the only first-hand descriptions of the disaster. The wreck sites themselves were only rediscovered by divers in 1985, and ship's timbers still work loose from the sand at low tide today. One beach, one storm. Over 1,000 men who never made it past the surf line, and the sea is still returning pieces of the evidence, more than 400 years later. Number 1. The ground underneath every house in Ireland. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas that seeps up out of the country's granite and shale bedrock and pools invisibly indoors. And Ireland has some of the highest indoor radon levels in Europe. It's tasteless, colorless, and odorless. You cannot know it's there without testing for it. Trinity College Dublin researchers, working with the Environmental Protection Agency, estimate radon causes roughly 250 lung cancer deaths in Ireland every single year, more than die in road traffic accidents. And an updated national risk map found around 170,000 Irish homes sitting in high radon areas, with earlier estimates putting as many as 460,000 people at potential risk nationwide. The counties hit hardest sit largely in Munster and Connacht, precisely where much of this list has already taken you. Every other place on this list you can see coming. The cliffs look like cliffs. The bog looks like a bog. This one is sitting in your kitchen right now, and the only warning sign is a number on a testing kit nobody bought. Every entry on this list is real, and this last one is the reason none of the others should surprise you. The danger in Ireland was never really about any one place. It's the ground itself. So tell me, have you actually been to any of these? And did I get your hometown wrong, or did I miss the one place near you that locals already know to avoid? Comments like that shape what I dig into next, so don't hold back if I got something wrong. And if this kept you watching this long, you know what to do, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more of the country left to get through.